today. But thanks again for joining, and let's go ahead and get started. Let me just share my screen really quickly. So again, my name is Sid Betancourt, and I use she, they pronouns, and I'm a housing advocacy organizer with the Coalition. And in case you don't know where you're at, you're currently joining the Tenant Talk Live webinar, where we kind of just host opportunities for you all to connect with one another and with NLIHC and share best practices around federal housing advocacy. And today we'll have a full agenda, and we'll begin with having one of our policy analysts, Kayla Laywell, provide some updates on NLIHC's work around the National Renters Bill of Rights and tenant protections. And then we'll move on to our panelists, Foluke Nunn, Becky Scott, and Rachel Johnson, to learn more about the Millennia Resistance Campaign and how to get involved. And then this is just a quick reminder to everyone, if you're signed up for NLIHC's emails, you should be receiving a weekly email every Friday called The Connection, where you'll have the recap information for all webinars, including this one. So you'll have the recording, you'll have the chat, and you'll have any links and resources that were shared in the chat in that follow-up email. So just make sure that you're receiving it, and if you're not, make a note for me and I can adjust that on the back end. And before we dive deeper into the listening session, I did just want to reshare community agreements that we put together at the beginning of the year. And on the screen, you'll see the rules, but feel free to share your thoughts in the chat or email me at sbetancourt@nlhc.org, and you can give me any feedback that you have on these. We can adjust them as we go, but I always welcome that feedback. But again, we're a little short on time today, so I want to make sure that we're able to get through everything. So I'll go ahead and hand it over to Kayla to share her update.
Hi, thanks, Sid. And thank you all for having me today. I will go quick. I only have 10 minutes, and then we get to hear from our lovely presenters. Okay, so again, hi, Kayla Laywell, Housing Policy Analyst at the National Low Income Housing Coalition. I'm going to be talking to you all today about our National Tenants Bill of Rights, an update, as we last talked about this in November at our Tenant Talk Live. So I first want to thank you all, attendees of this meeting, for your previous feedback back in our November Tenant Talk Live. Again, I'm just going to be giving you a brief update on this Tenant Bill of Rights platform. It's a moving, big, broad Tenant Bill of Rights, and I want to hear what's missing and what else do you all think we should consider in this broad platform. So I'll ask that question again, but to dive into it, the National Low Income Housing Coalition has been working with the National Housing Law Project, NHLP, to draft a legislative outline for a Tenants Bill of Rights. In general, this comprehensive bill will apply to all housing, including private rental market and federally subsidized housing, with the exception of the last section that includes rights specific to tenants in federally subsidized housing. The final product of this bill will be a comprehensive tenants' rights legislation encompassing tenants' rights from application, applying to a unit, to during their tenancy, to moving out of an apartment, to protections during an eviction as a last resort. So since last fall, the National Low Income Housing Coalition has been working with tenant leaders to build this legislative platform. The outline of the platform thus far includes feedback from you all here at Tenant Talk Live, from our Tenant Leader Caucus, and from the White House letter on tenant protections that the Tenant Leader Caucus sent. So we are trying to get as much feedback and make this a tenant-led platform overall. So to dive into it, again, this is going to be for all stages of a tenant's residency. Number one, the Tenant Bill of Rights will include the right to be free from discrimination at all stages. So this first section includes adding protections to the Fair Housing Act, including adding source of income discrimination, prohibiting eviction history, rental debt, criminal history, substance abuse, and additional protections for survivors of gender-based violence, including domestic violence, sexual assault, dating violence, and stalking. So again, that first section on the right to be free from discrimination at all stages. Secondly, the right to organize. You all might remember the Tenants Bill of Rights that Representative Andy Levin introduced last year. This section would extend upon that. So adding additional funding and protection from retaliation for renters organizing, and to focus in on the renters with housing choice vouchers or in LIHTC developments, we're going to focus that in the last section, so bear with me. So again, second, that's the right to organize. Third, the Tenant Bill of Rights platform includes the right to a fair and transparent tenant application process. So this section is targeting two actors here, landlords and tenant screening companies, particularly through the Fair Credit Reporting Act. And this section would regulate rental screening practices, application fees, and this section would charge a government entity with advocating on behalf of all tenants. So again, this platform is kind of broadly shifting, but we're thinking that this would include a ombudsperson for tenant rights, either in HUD or how specifically that would look, we're not totally sure yet, but a tenant protection advocate. Fourth, we're talking about rights during tenancy. So requiring leases to have reasonable terms and clearly articulating tenant rights. This section would also include rent stabilization, protections from rent gouging, and limits on other fees, including utilities, and transparent process around security deposits. This would also include a right to a habitable property. Sorry, that's a hard word to say. And I see a few questions popping up. I don't have a PowerPoint or anything to share just because I'm running through this very quickly, but I will drop my email in case, and as we're rolling this out, I'll of course share it more with you all as well. Okay, so sorry, that was rights during tenancy, including to a right to a habitable property. And that includes accessible standards and safe habitability, including rights when ownership of property changes, particularly for LIHTC properties. And this section would also require right to information and clear communications with landlords. The fifth section of our broad Tenant Bill of Rights includes a right to eviction as a last resort, including eviction prevention and eviction legal system transparency. So this includes NLIHC's work to establish an ongoing emergency rental assistance program through our Eviction Crisis Act. And overall, we're trying to recalibrate the balance of power between landlord and tenants. So this section includes provisions such as increasing due process protections in the eviction court system, mediation, diversion, and sealed or expunged evictions, as well as the right to counsel. I'm talking fast because this will include a lot of things, but I'm running through it. Lastly, we've got the right to robust enforcement of existing tenant rights, including the Tenant Empowerment Act and other tenant rights protections. And then finally, we've got the funding for states and localities tied to tenant protections. So in order to enforce all of this, we are hoping to tie it to components that states solely have jurisdiction over. So we acknowledge that many components of landlord-tenant law fall on the states in some jurisdictions. And this section would create incentives for states to create a core set of tenant protections. And then lastly, I've been leading up to it, but rights specific to federally subsidized housing, including LIHTC and housing choice vouchers, but also housing through USDA, through the Rural Housing Service, and Treasury. So this streamlines the application process for all federally assisted housing, requiring HUD to streamline applications and eliminate application fees, and expanding the right to organize for LIHTC and housing choice voucher tenants. So again, I know I spoke fast. I'm going to drop my email in the chat. I just wanted to provide you all with a brief update with where we are in the Tenant Bill of Rights platform that we're building. And I hope to provide you again an update in the coming months. Thank you so much, Sid.
Thank you so much, Kayla. And I know we had a question in the chat about whether we have this somewhere written down that we can share. Is that available anywhere, or is it?
Not yet.
Okay. Well, we'll share it when it's available, though.
Yes, we'll do that.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And yeah, so we'll have you back on when there's more updates for sure. But thank you for coming on. All right. Well, thank you again, Kayla. And I'll now pass it on to Foluke, Becky, and Rachel to present more about the Millennia Resistance Campaign. And thank you again for the thoughtful questions in the chat, friends. I'll go ahead and answer them as they come if they're relevant to. Or if they're not relevant to what Foluke is talking about, but I'll be sharing my screen too so that Foluke can give the presentation. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you so much, Sid. Good evening, everyone. I'm just going to briefly introduce myself. So my name is Foluke Nunn, and I am a community organizer with the Atlanta Economic Justice Program of the American Friends Service Committee, based in Atlanta. And I'm here with Becky Scott and Rachel Johnson this evening to speak to you about the National Millennia Resistance Campaign. And before we get started, first, I just want to thank the coalition so much for giving us a platform to discuss the campaign. We really appreciate it and we're really grateful to be here. And I'm just going to hand it over first to Rachel and then to Becky, just to briefly introduce themselves.
Good evening, I'm Rachel Johnson, housing advocate, and we have a group online called Faces of HUD Housing. Is that?
Yes. Thank you, Rachel. Becky, you can go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Becky Scott. I live in Memphis. I'm a tenant at Memphis Towers, and I am active in the Memphis Tenants Union.
Fantastic. Thank you both. So we can move to the next slide. And so many of you may have already heard of Millennia, or maybe depending on where you are in the country, you're already connected with them. And if you are, please put that in the chat because we'd love to see who we have in the room. But for those who are not familiar with Millennia, they're an affordable housing owner, manager, and developer that's based out of Cleveland, Ohio. And they own and or manage about 30,000 units across 26 states. And so you can see in the map here, pretty much if you live in the eastern part of the United States, there's probably a Millennia complex in your backyard. And the reason we're talking about them today is because they have a clear track record of mismanagement. So they neglect their maintenance. Tenants in their complexes deal with all sorts of horrors, from sewage leaks to rats to structural instability. There's a lack of security in many of their complexes, which causes them to be a magnet for all sorts of crime. Many tenants report poor and incomplete record keeping. For example, tenants may be charged incorrect late fees for rent, or their recertification is done incorrectly. Millennia also has a reputation for retaliating against tenants who seek to organize. And finally, they have a reputation for failing to pay their contractors as well. So if we move to the next slide, we can see a few reviews. These are from a site called Level Set that allows contractors to post reviews of their employers. And so this is just a snapshot of a few of those reviews, people talking about how it takes forever to get paid, how Millennia makes excuses for why they don't pay their bills, how they don't maintain their properties. And the last review talks about how it's not an occasional occurrence, it is pattern and practice for the company across the board. And so I know that in conversations with tenants in Atlanta, Millennia tenants, I've heard people mention this, mention that they've heard from contractors that they aren't paid on time. I know that other folks who are connected to the campaign have heard similar things. And so this is another piece of Millennia's reputation of mismanagement. We can go to the next slide. So last year, Millennia's negligence led to tragic consequences. 5 Millennia tenants perished in their apartment complexes within 6 weeks of each other. And their names are Kendra Tate, Deshandra Tate, Aloise Childs, Kenneth Jackson, and Wanda Watts. And Deshandra and Kendra were tenants of Sunset Village in Cleveland, Mississippi, who died due to a carbon monoxide leak at the end of August of 2022. And Miss Watts, Mr. Jackson, and Miss Childs were tenants in Shorter College Gardens apartments in North Little Rock, Arkansas, who died in a fire that was thought to have been started by a gas leak in early October of 2022. And these are all people who would still be alive if Millennia had addressed the gas issues that tenants in both complexes had attempted to report multiple times. And so this is why we have this campaign, so this does not continue to happen, because we don't doubt that there are many more tenants who have perished in their units as a result of Millennia's actions. And our hope is that this campaign will be successful before more tenants have to lose their lives. And so we're going to go through 3 Millennia complexes that are connected to the coalition. But first, if you go to the next slide, I just want to give some important context. So back in 2016, HUD forced a company called Global Ministries Foundation to sell its portfolio to Millennia, and Millennia promised to redevelop those complexes. And so this is how Millennia came into the picture for many complexes, including all of the complexes that we'll be speaking about today. And so the complex that kicked this process off was Eureka Gardens, which is now called Valencia Way in Jacksonville, Florida. And we can move to the next slide, and I will hand it over to Ms. Rachel to speak about Eureka Gardens.
Okay, so as a housing advocate, I went to Eureka Gardens based on my research that I did with HUD. What I looked for was the potentially troubled housing that was around the country. And I would, up under our Saving Our Homes and Taking Back Our Communities tour, I would go to certain neighborhoods. So this was one of the properties that I chose because of the low score, REACT score that they had. And so I reached out to Tracy Grant, who was the president of Eureka Gardens Resident Council. And so Senator Marco Rubio of Florida, Congressman Tim Scott from Carolina, and Dr. Ben Carson visited the property. And just to be very short and to the point is that they ended up coming during an election year. And so we have to be very mindful of the politicians who come to our neighborhoods and pretend like they're coming to really get rid of the issue when it's really just something to help them. They pretty much exploiting or working against the people with all these different corporations. And so we have to be mindful of election years and things. That's what is the other reason why they're coming to this property and giving it so much attention at that time. And so they gave it so much attention that Tracy Grant, she spoke at the Senate hearing. Marco Rubio took her there. And so this property has had so many different problems, the lead issues, children tested positive for lead. They also had water would get cut off for long periods of time, electrical problems, just you name it, they had it, mold, mildew, downstairs not working properly, or installed properly. Just everything was wrong with this property. And so just to fast forward a little bit, I know I'm missing a little bit of spots, but we don't have much time, but they ended up getting a rehab or forcing Global Ministries to sell the property to Millennia, which was the management company at that time. And one of the things that I don't understand is why does HUD approve such a sale to a management company who didn't take care of the property from the beginning. And so to fast forward, they ended up getting the rehab, funding for rehab and of the property. And the day of the ceremony, there was not many tenants in attendance. There was only a couple tenants in attendance, and I wondered why. And so with me walking around the property and speaking to some of the tenants were having issues at the time they had a ceremony after the rehab was done. And so tenants must come together. It's so, so important for you to come together. And they ended up having to house most of the tenants in a couple of the buildings into a hotel. They kept that really quiet. Nobody really knew that at the same time they're having a ceremony of the rehab and renovations of this property, tenants were moved to hotels because of electrical problems. No lights were working. And so, so that's pretty much how this millennial situation got started. And there are 3 different properties that are in the state of Florida, and it's Windsor Cove and Orlando. I'm sorry, 4. Windsor Cove and Orlando. You got Stony Brook that's in Riviera Beach, and you got Cordova Court in Miami, and then Eureka Gardens. So yeah, Eureka Gardens, I just really just want everybody to be mindful of the different schemes and plans that people have that they play on the backs of poor people.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Rachel. And this is really important to speak about because to this day, Marco Rubio's office is touting Eureka Gardens, Valencia Way as a success, saying, oh, look how great of a job that we did. And there's so much more to the story. So thank you so much for sharing. This photo is actually an image of Marco Rubio on the steps of one of the buildings in Eureka Gardens on the day of that grand opening that Miss Rachel was just describing. We can go to the next the next slide. Great. So Forest Cove. So Forest Cove is, as I mentioned before, another former Global Ministries property in Atlanta. It's huge. It's almost 400 units. And so Millennia began managing Forest Cove in late 2017 and finally bought Forest Cove in April of 2021. And they promised that they would renovate Forest Cove after they bought it, but the sale took years. And then Millennia kept on coming up with excuses about why it was taking so long. And the conditions in Forest Cove before Millennia came onto the scene were already really bad. So residents were dealing with mold, rats, leaks, just about every hazard that you can imagine. And during this time, Millennia was operating as a management agent for Global Ministries. So between when it began managing Forest Cove in 2017 and when it bought it in 2021, they were a management agent. So Global Ministries technically owned the property, but Millennia was running it. And they claimed they were not being given enough money to adequately perform maintenance. And who knows whether this was true, but what happened was that tenants were just suffering while their units fell apart around them. And even though Millennia's excuse was that they were not receiving enough money as the management agent, the situation did not change after they took over 2 years ago. But residents were finally relocated off-site in October after the city stepped in. It's a much longer story, but my hope was that we would be mostly out of the woods with everyone off-site, but that hasn't been the case. So just a few examples. The relocation specialist that Millennia hired to oversee the process has paid resident rents late for months in a row now, which has caused some residents to receive eviction notices. Residents received transit and gas cards because they were relocated all over the Atlanta metro area. And they received transit and gas cards to help with transportation to their jobs, school, et cetera. And these have not been reloaded on time. Some residents have not been able to use them lately. And also many residents have been moved to units that still have significant living conditions issues and in some cases come close to what they experienced in Forest Cove. And so on top of that, there's still a ton of uncertainty about the future because we don't know if Millennia will be able to redevelop Forest Cove. Right now, they're in the process of applying for tax credits to renovate the property so that residents can hopefully be brought back within the next couple of years. But there haven't been any updates on their tax credit application, and we're not sure what is going to happen in the future. So there are a lot of unknowns that Forest Cove residents are dealing with right now. And Millennia has completely botched this process. So I'm going to stop there and I'm going to hand it over to Becky to speak about Memphis Towers. You can go to the next slide.
Hi. So I moved into Memphis Towers last September, and it's actually my second time living here. I lived here about 10 years ago when it was under different management. When I moved in, the day that I moved in, there was no hot water. I called, it was fixed by the next morning, which was a Monday morning, and I thought it was just a fluke. Turns out that it was a routine thing at Memphis Towers, that the hot water was turned off in the evenings and on weekends, which is when most people use the majority of their hot water. So people weren't able to do their dishes, weren't able to bathe properly without boiling water on the stove. The washing machines didn't work properly. And come to find out, it had been an ongoing issue since April of that year. And what was needed was the installation of a new boiler, and management was simply refusing to do it. This was one of many issues that occur regularly here at Memphis Towers. I would say that that was probably the most widely and deeply felt at the time because it affected everyone. I myself had a lot of very disturbing and inappropriate issues that can be blamed on lack of security. And there are issues of bed bugs and rodents and other pests. So about a month after I moved in, I was connected with the Memphis Tenants Union. And I have almost 13 years of organizing experience in different social justice movements. So I decided that I wanted to be a part of this movement since it seemed like they're really trying to affect change. And I wanted to lend my skills. And so we were getting started on the hot water campaign when I joined up, and we issued a list of demands to management about the hot water. And we began an escalation plan to proceed when they ignored our demands and refused to meet with us, which we knew they would, and they did. They refused to have a meeting with us to discuss the situation. And they didn't follow up on any of our demands. So we went to the media, and within 2 days of us going to the media about the hot water, they had a meeting with all the residents and gave us a firm installation date for the hot water. And they actually followed up on that commitment, and now the hot water problems are fixed. So our next big campaign is around the lack of security, the complete lack of security, which we expect to encompass a lot of things and also solve a lot of problems related to cleanliness and vandalism, and other issues like that. So we are working on fine-tuning our demands for that. And we do have members who have experienced retaliation from management. But we're going to keep going. And this campaign for security might be more complicated and more layered. But I expect that we will win this just like we won hot water. And I think that is all the information I have right now about Memphis Towers.
Thank you so much, Becky. You can go to the next slide. So how is Millennia able to get away with all of this? And so I'm sure that what I'm about to say is probably not going to be a surprise to most of you on this call, but the simple answer is that they're able to get away with it because HUD allows it. And actually this photo in the background is a picture of the aftermath of the fire in Shorter College Gardens that killed 3 tenants back in October. So first, the systems that are in place to monitor compliance are weak. So the REACT system that HUD uses to conduct physical inspections of properties has many issues. As we know, there are many properties that pass the REACT inspections and still have severe problems. And of course, HUD is in the process of reforming this scoring system. So we'll see what, if any, changes come from that. But the other issue is that HUD refuses to use all of the tools that it has at its disposal to address landlords who fail to keep their properties up to standard. So HUD has the ability to set up receiverships or impose civil money penalties or transfer the contract, for example. But in the case of many Millennia properties, they have refused to do this. And then the other issue is that when certain problems are brought to the attention of local HUD officials, they're often dismissed or they don't put the necessary pressure on Millennia to get answers and resolutions for tenants. And so part of the reason why this national campaign began is because HUD has been addressing issues as they come up within individual complexes and they have not gotten down to the root of the problem. And so many of the people within the campaign will say, particularly those complexes that are within the southeast region of HUD. I believe it's region 4, if I'm remembering correctly, but the Georgia, Florida, Mississippi, South Carolina, that region, a lot of folks have the same experience with the HUD regional staff where issue will come up in their property, repeated issues, severe issues, life-threatening issues, and they will, instead of the problem being escalated up to national HUD, instead of a pattern being identified, people are still referred back to their local HUD offices. And so the organizers and the tenant advocates recognize that, hey, we need to get down to the root of this problem. We can't keep addressing Millennia in a piecemeal, complex by complex manner. So you can go to the next slide. And it's important for me to say that this current effort is just the latest iteration of what has been a years-long effort to address Millennia from a national perspective. So back in 2017, 2018, I saw Miss Geraldine Collins in the chat. Hi, Miss Collins, from NAT. There was the NAT Millennia Task Force. And so that kind of got the ball rolling on bringing Millennia complexes together that had severe issues. And then in 2021, there was the 662 Tenants Union, so out of Mississippi, began to convene organizations and tenants who are impacted by Millennia into a national campaign. And that took place beginning the end of 2020 through mid 2021. And so this Millennia Resistance Campaign, we convened in 2022 last year. And the first kind of launch of the campaign came in the form of the National Housing Law Project sending a letter to Secretary Fudge. You can actually go to the next slide. Yes, so sorry, let me backtrack a little bit. So we first convened in February of last year, and then NHLP sent their letter to HUD in April of 2022 that outlined a few Millennia complexes and some of the issues that they've been experiencing and just bringing the problem to Fudge's attention. And then in August of last year, 6 complexes met with national HUD staff. We had issued our demands earlier that month, and that meeting was a way to discuss the demands, discuss the experiences of the different tenants on the call and how those demands applied to them and their situations. So speaking of the demands, we can move on to the next slide. Oh, so these are just a few of the complexes that are represented in the coalition. So complexes from, of course, Atlanta, Florida, Tennessee, Missouri, North Carolina, Louisiana, and Mississippi. You can go to the next slide. So these are our demands. We have 8 of them. And the first one is for a national investigation into Millennia. So looking into the root causes of why Millennia has these patterns. Next, we're calling on HUD to improve their oversight and enforcement of condition standards. And as part of that, we want HUD to use all of the tools in their toolbox. So as we said earlier, whether that's transferring their contract, transferring HAP contracts, the issuance of civil money penalties, receiverships, et cetera. We want HUD to use those tools to address Millennia and other bad actors, and also make sure that tenants have the right to abate their rent or move if their housing can't be made habitable in a reasonable period of time. Next is reimbursing Millennia tenants for out-of-pocket expenses that are related to living conditions. So a lot of folks have to pay money for medical bills, childcare, replacing personal items they might have lost due to mold or other causes. So we want folks to be reimbursed. We want Millennia tenants to receive displaced Millennia tenants to receive housing options. So a lot of tenants end up becoming homeless because they move out on their own due to the conditions of their units. And in a lot of cities, there aren't many other affordable options, so in Atlanta, a lot of tenants who have left Forest Cove, because we have such an affordability crisis in the city, people end up staying on their couches of family and friends, or some people end up on the street Some people end up in shelters because there's just nowhere for them to go, and it's not fair for people to have to be punished because and to lose their housing because their landlord was negligent. So that's one of the things that we're asking for. Also, next, honoring the demands of local tenant associations. So many of the tenant associations in our coalition have their own demands that they're calling on Millennia to honor. So, for example, as Becky said earlier, one of the demands of the Memphis Tenants Union, the Memphis Towers Tenant Association, is better security. So just making sure that the tenant associations in our coalition receive what they're asking for. Next is including tenants and tenant associations in decision-making about the future of their housing. So making sure that tenants are treated as partners in the preservation process. Next is protecting tenants' rights to organize, and making sure that folks don't face retaliation, and that Millennia and other bad actors are investigated and are penalized for violating their right to organize. And last, we want to make sure that residents' right to organize is fully funded. You can go to the next slide. So now I just have a couple of questions for Rachel and Becky. And so I can just go ahead. I'll just go ahead and group them into one question, and whoever wants to begin to answer can feel free to jump in. So first is, what made you want to get involved with this national campaign against Millennia? And so you can answer that. And then in your answer, I know that one thing that a lot of folks are concerned about that we connect with is retaliation. And so a lot of folks have a fear of speaking out. So would like to know, what would you say to those tenants who maybe are interested in organizing, but are afraid to begin that process because they fear retaliation?
I'll go
Well,
first.
go ahead,
Or
Becky.
How
do you
about
want
we
to
go
go
to
ahead, Rachel?
Go ahead, Becky. Go ahead.
The first part of the question was why did we become involved with the national campaign, right?
Yes.
So I got involved because I'm kind of accustomed to organizing on a national level anyway. And I just believe that there's strength in numbers, and with all of these people across the country, I mean, it's like half the states in the country who are experiencing the same atrocities that I am, and who have different lived experiences and different skill sets and different resources. I think that if we all unite together, then we can take Millennia down once and for all. As far as what I would say to anyone who is afraid to speak out, legally, there is nothing that they can do to you. They will try, they will threaten, but their threats don't have any kind of basis in legality. And they know this, but they just take it for granted that tenants don't know this. That it's illegal for them to harass you or retaliate against you for organizing for your right to basic decent living accommodations. So I would encourage anybody to just call their bluff, because there's nothing they can do to you.
Thank you, Becky. You can go ahead, Miss Rachel.
Okay, so me growing up in a multifamily project-based property and working along with Nat as an organizer, that was one of our tasks, was to go and find these different problematic properties, the troubled housing properties. So that's one reason why I got involved. I just didn't like the fact that families, and especially children, were living in these conditions. And so so I was tasked with finding these locations. And so it's so important for tenants to get involved, even when things aren't happening, even when your conditions are okay. And I notice sometimes as an organizer, we come out and it may not be happening to you, but it may be happening to another tenant. The conditions may be bad, in another tenant's unit. And I think that it's so important for you to join forces with that person, because it could be you it could be you next. And so it's so important just to get organized and join forces with these organizations that do this work and are in these streets to make the conditions better for you. National Alliance of HUD Tenants and American Friends now, you know, they have this task force that's going through different hands, but at least it starts from where everybody left off. So that's why it's so important to get organized.
Thank you so much, Ms. Rachel. You can move to the next slide. Awesome. So as we wrap up, the last big thing I want to talk about is our day of action, which will be taking place on April 1st of this year. So there's a few actions that we will be taking as a coalition and that we are asking our allies to take. So the first is to call or email HUD to lift up the coalition's demands. We're also asking that folks who are in a city where there's a Millennia complex, let's say that you have an organization or a group that you're affiliated with, it'd be really helpful to canvass one of those Millennia complexes with our tenant organizing toolkit. Actually, I forgot to mention this before we were talking about organizing. It'd be great if we could put the toolkit in the chat. Oh, thank you for putting the petition in the chat as well. We wanted to we created an organizing guide for tenants earlier this year, because we knew that, you know, there's just so many Millennia complexes and so many folks who do not know where to start with organizing. So we wanted to give them an easy to follow, just quick, easy toolkit that they could use to begin that process. And then also that toolkit contains information for them to get in touch with the campaign as well. So we're asking the folks who have the capacity, if you could help us by canvassing a nearby Millennia complex with that toolkit, that'd be extremely helpful. Also contacting your Congress people to lift up the issue of Millennia and lift up the coalition's demands. Next is amplifying the campaign on social media. I'm going to talk about our social media accounts in a moment, but we'll be posting. And so it'd be great to have folks to amplify those posts. Next is signing and sharing our petition. I believe Gabby posted our petition earlier a few moments ago. And so if you all could sign that and then share the petition, that would be really helpful. And then finally, we will be organizing in-person actions in Atlanta and in Memphis. And so if you all are in that area, if you could come, that would be amazing. And so if we could put the link, we have a form that you all can fill out if you or your organization would like to participate in the day of action. So we can make sure that that is in the chat as well. You all can fill out that form. Great, thank you, Gabby. And put down your information, your organization's information, and then just check off which of these actions you'd like to take, or if there's something else you'd like to do on that day, you can put that down as well. We can move to the next slide. Great. So if you'd like to connect with us, this is our contact information. You can email millenniaresistance@gmail.com. Remember that Millennia has 2 L's and 2 N's. So want to make sure that we get your emails, so you can email this address, or you can reach out to us on Instagram. We're at Millennia Resistance, and on Twitter, we are at Resist Millennia. And so if you are on this call and you're someone who either lives in a Millennia complex or you're connected to Millennia tenants, please reach out to us, because we'd love to grow this campaign as large as we can. And with that, I am going to stop talking and see if we have any questions.
Oh, awesome. Sorry, I was sharing my screen and I definitely lost track of where the unmute button was, but thank you so much, Foluke, and thank you, Rachel and Becky, for sharing your personal experiences as well. We did have a lot of questions and comments coming through, so I'll go through like the ones that I caught through that presentation. And I know we have some in the Q&A as well, but I guess like the first question that we got a lot was just how can tenants like deal with the retaliation? And I know you had a webinar earlier last week kind of talking about that as well. You know, just if you could dive deeper into that.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Miss Rachel.
Okay, I want to say that retaliation, it's really for different people. Different people can handle it different ways. And so I think that but what's so important is that from the beginning, you document. You make sure that you document. And so when you are being retaliated against, once you start off on a certain relationship with the management or the owners, that retaliation can be seen in your documentation. So that's your backup. And so when you see other people going through those same issues, if you pull them together with you in the good times, in the good, when things aren't really bad, if you pull them together and you organize, get educated, collect documentation, reach out to HUD for Freedom of Information Act information on that property. That way you get everything that's happening that you are not being told. So, and that helps you with the retaliation part to win these different things when you make the complaints.
Yep, definitely. Thank you, Miss Rachel. Becky, do you have anything to add to that? If you're speaking, you are muted.
Sorry, I lost that part of my screen. I don't necessarily have anything more to add to that because being a newer person in the campaign and in the union, I haven't personally experienced retaliation, but some of my neighbors have. Like we have one person who has been here for several years and who is kind of the front person here at the property for organizing, and she's experienced a lot of harassment and a lot of retaliation from management. And she hasn't been evicted. They've threatened her, but she's not been evicted because basically she calls their bluff because she knows that if they were to take it to court, that there would be no way for them to win. So that's why I say just call their bluff.
Great. Thank you, Becky. And the last thing that I'll say, definitely want to echo what Miss Rachel said about documenting. I think in general, that's just a fantastic rule of thumb, whether you're dealing with, retaliation or anything else. But also, if you're someone who's connected to, and this kind of goes a little bit to what Becky was saying around calling their bluff. If you're someone who's connected to an advocacy organization or a legal aid organization, and you can have them, write up something for you to your landlord that says, hey, this is illegal, and just kind of spells that out, you'd be surprised, just knowing that outside eyes are on the situation is enough to make a lot of landlords just reverse course immediately. So that'd be the only other thing that I'd add to that.
Thank you so much, all. And I did quickly just want to answer one more question in the Q&A before I go to audience members to unmute themselves. But is it okay if I share like the contact information with everyone afterwards? I think somebody was asking for Rachel's email, and I think someone was asking for your email, so we can definitely.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Thank you. And then I think I have Mrs. Brown on deck, who's one of our tenant leaders in our tenant leader cohort. Mrs. B, you should be able to talk now.
Yes, thank you very much.
Of course.
Good evening, everyone. I want to expand on Rachel Johnson's comment about nurturing in good times. I think the residents, when you're present in good times and you have a strong relationship with the tenants, when it comes time to stand in unpleasant times, they will be there for you. The only caveat is with the elderly, your seniors, because their biggest fear is that they're going to be evicted and they're going to be homeless. And another way of combating that is have your legal aid societies, your NAACPs, your urban leagues, to come in and speak to your group regularly and talk about tenant protections, and that they are part of the vulnerable class and therefore they will be protected. And that helps a lot, knowing that some of these organizations who've been around for decades are saying the same thing that you're saying. And so they will come into the fold. So that's all I wanted to add. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Brown. Did anybody want to follow up to that comment as well, Foluke, Rachel, Becky?
No, she's absolutely right. It's about nurturing. I was just about to type, do wealth checks, conduct those wealth checks of the seniors and disabled people, that to make sure that they're not being retaliated against, so that you could start documenting for them as well. So at least you have that, and that will help them to, like, that relationship is so important. It's so important. It is. And when they know that somebody's gonna be in the paint with them, it's so important.
Agreed. We did have one more Q&A question, or we have two, but there was one that I wanted to make sure we highlighted. But Damon did leave a question, and I think this came up when you were listing the demands, Foluke, but can you add like housing as a right as well to those demands, or do you think that they're like already incorporated into what you're asking for HUD?
Yeah, I definitely think that we can be more explicit about that. And so we are actually working on an updated letter to HUD with reiterating our national demands, and then also highlighting some complex specific demands. And so I think that, yeah, I think that's a really good idea, just emphasizing that, we believe that housing needs to be treated as a human right. And because it is. So yes, thank you for raising that.
Thank you so much, Foluke. I think we're gonna have time for one more question. So I'll go ahead and invite Miss Jerry to unmute yourself if you're able to unmute, Miss Jerry. And I'll have you be the last question for today.
Hi, thanks, Sid, for giving me this opportunity to speak. I just want to encourage everyone that in 2019, Nat introduced the Tenant Empowerment Bill, Bill number 4237. And all the issues that we've been discussing here tonight is part of that bill. And we're asking everyone on here to please go to your congresspeople in your state and ask them to please support this bill. It is very crucial that we try to get this bill passed, because tenants need to have better protection. That all of the situations that's going on with the situation of the mold, the mildews and everything, and tenants are continuing to pay rent. This has to stop. Better conditions has to be made by HUD. We have to hold HUD accountable. And the only way we can hold HUD accountable is trying to get this bill passed, or any other bill that concerns tenants. Thank you.
And if I can add to that also, there's civil monetary penalties that Nat, helped to get approved by HUD. And we really need to get them to understanding that when they file these complaints, when tenants file these complaints, you need to go after those civil monetary penalties that they have in place. Most times when these owners and management agents and these complaints are filed against them, HUD is receiving like the the funding, or, you know, what do they call it? Damages or whatever. The tenants aren't really getting any damages. But we have to fight for that as tenant councils, and that's why you need to form those tenant councils so that you go in together. Make that happen.
Thank you so much, Rachel, for sharing too, and thank you to Ms. Jerry for also sharing that information on the bill. I don't believe it's been introduced in this Congress yet, so I don't know if we have like a number to share, but it's called the Tenant Improvement Act, I think it's called. But yeah, thank you all so much for sharing, and thank you, Foluke, Rachel, and Becky for joining us today for today's Tenant Talk Live. We had so many questions and so many people eager to learn more, so we'll definitely be sharing that information out in the future, but I'll definitely follow up with you all once I go through the chat and Q&A feature afterwards with any questions that were left unanswered, and I'll share that with you all. But thank you again so much. And I'll just quickly go over some updates for everyone. As always, if you have any questions or if you want to provide any suggestions for this webinar, you can always email me. And I really appreciate y'all reaching out to me. I feel like I've gotten closer to the community, so really, really thank you for reaching out and sharing that feedback as well. And then I have some really good news as well. Beginning in April, we will be holding Tenant Talk Live webinars on the 1st and 3rd Monday of every month, and the time will be the same. It'll be at 6 p.m. Eastern time. So, you know, we've had a lot of folks kind of asking for more time and more space to kind of just learn, but also be with one another. So we're hoping that this will help kind of facilitate that as well. And we'll begin in April, hopefully, with having some of the tenant session content for folks that weren't able to attend the forum, or for folks that were on the West Coast and weren't able to attend morning sessions of the forum. So that's really exciting, and I'm very excited to spend more time with y'all. And then just a reminder that we'll be continuing to look for blog post authors for our On the Home Front blog, and we'll share those guidelines in the follow-up email. But if you want to participate in that, you can email us at outreach@nlhc.org. And then the last update that I'll always share is just make sure that you join our Facebook page, because that's a good way to stay connected with us and learn about upcoming. But that is all I have for today. And again, thank you so much, everyone. And thank you to our panelists for being here today. And we'll see you on April 3rd, everybody. Bye-bye.